Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to day 3 and the last day of our Bronco Billy Silent Film Festival. It is the 24th annual. So next year, when things get normal again, cross our fingers and toes, we will have a big bang 25th anniversary Diamond Jubilee, or what is it? What is it? Golden anniversary. Is that right? Golden? Okay, either
Seems
way.
right.
Yes. So I wanted to welcome Matias Bombal here. He is going to be talking all kinds of things about the pageantry of silent film time and also early talkies, the pageantry and the majesty of the movie-going experience. But I did want to make an announcement, and he kindly granted me that opportunity. And I'm going to do my best to, I'll share my screen. I'm still a novice at this, so, but I'll explain for just a moment. So our museum was able to acquire a Charlie Chaplin poster due to the complete generosity of some benefactors. And we did announce that at the last month's event, which is the Charlie Chaplin Days. And that poster, it's a big poster, it's gotten restored, it's now in our possession, and now we're going to be getting it framed and have it available for display. The very same company, Jadis Props, which is out of Santa Monica, her partner, Susan's partner, ended up with a roll of partially printed SNA film posters. And they are missing wording, but they have the imagery. And when we purchased the Chaplin poster, she gave us 2 posters that were in need of repair. And we have, again, through the generosity of some other supporters, have gotten them repaired, and they just arrived at our doorstep today. So I wanted to share the screen and show you the before and the after. So let me hit share screen. Here we go. And the images aren't going to be particularly large because I can't figure out how to do that right. Okay, so here is one of the images. And I know that David Kiehn, who is not yet back here, would know the name of the movie that this is from. And so, but you can see that there's some damage to it and such. Now, I believe if I click this, you can see what they were able to do with it. And okay, don't save. There it is. So this is what it looks like now. And I think that's pretty amazing. It's an amazing image. And I love the fact that it's active. Does this look familiar to you at all, Matias?
No, I'm not recalling that scene in a picture.
Yeah, so that's one of them. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. So we now have these available. We're going to be able to get them framed, and we'll have the whole story of where they came from. Probably get a image of a photo still from it. But it is an SNA film. Here is another one, and again, this is pretty damaged. You can see, but it's also blurry. But you can see that it really had a lot of problems with it. And this is, there we are. So this is what it looks like now. Pretty amazing. All that damage that was done, they airbrushed it and they cleaned it, and it's just, I think it's pretty stellar. So, and also it's another really interesting image. So I was really excited that the images are interesting, because there are sometimes they did pictures where they weren't quite so much going on. Okay, so I just want to make those announcements. So that's pretty fun. But now we're on to Matias and talking about the pageantry of the movie-going experience. So Matias, take it away.
Thank you. Just one quick aside. What are the dimensions of those advertising posters, so our viewers might get a sense of the size of them?
That's a very good point. I believe that they would be considered 1-sheets. We rolled them out, and they are no bigger. They're not bigger than the bed. So I believe they're just a 1-sheet poster. So yes,
Beautiful
I know.
work. Outstanding.
I'll find out more about them. Only if you're talking, and then David comes in, I can ask him. But so the reason why I wanted you to talk today was because we did show that amazing film, the Alhambra Palace of Fantasy, Sacramento's Palace of Fantasy. And we're so thankful that we had access to it. sounds like over 100 people have seen it today, and that's really exciting. So tell me about why you thought it was important. I mean, maybe it sounds obvious why it was important, but why did you think it was important to capture that theater in Sacramento?
Well, the road to this movie started when my, at that time, co-producer, well, he's still the co-producer of the picture, but we had made two documentaries before. The Sacramento picture we made together in partnership with the Center for Sacramento History. And then we worked on an NBC documentary together. And all the time, Chad said, we're in Sacramento, let's make a documentary about the Alhambra. He really thought it would be something that would really speak to it's the Sacramento community. We had made a movie called The Sacramento Picture, which had celebrated all of the rare film that existed in the collection of the Center for Sacramento History, going back to 1910, nitrate home movies, other things in 35 millimeter, all the way up to the 50s, creating a movie picture of a community. But we decided then not to do the Alhambra because we thought this is a subject in and of itself. Not only for Sacramentans, but because of its unusual architecture, it was something that was especially important as far as theater history went. And since it was not like many other movie palaces, primarily because the architect designed a remarkable garden in front of it to go with it. Most movie palaces met the street with their box office and their marquee, where the show started on the sidewalk, as you perhaps heard before. The Alhambra was really just about almost a city block away from the curve, in which you had to approach it first through these initial lawns, then in these enclosed courts with fountains and rare plantings, and then you got to the box office. So architecturally, it was interesting on an interest level that would go beyond just Sacramento. And the history of the development of show business from the late 20s all the way to 1973, when it was demolished, encapsulated not only a good portion of this century, but a fascinating parade of how we were entertained and how that changed over time. And I have to admit, Chad Williams was absolutely right. This was a ripe subject for a documentary.
Well, it is quite spectacular. I'm so glad I got a chance to see it. So tell me about, could you compare the Alhambra experience versus the other theaters in Sacramento and maybe the difference in the pageantry of it?
Well, the Alhambra being built by an independent association of businessmen formed in 1926 called the Granada Company. These men were Sacramento businessmen of some wealth and had a great deal going on in the community, but they weren't show people. And they wanted to do something completely different. They brought in a very important Sacramento architect, Leonard Starks, to make the building. He had made remarkable buildings in the city that still remain standing today. The city post office, the Elks Lodge number 6, which is downtown. Some of those are pointed out in our documentary as we tell the story of the architect himself. And so they wanted something that really would put Sacramento on the map architecturally, that hadn't really been done before in the area. In looking at the other Sacramento theaters, to get to the point of your question, as they did throughout the rest of the country, as I mentioned before, they were part of a city block, and they were the marquee was right there at the street. So this idea of this escapism in architecture was something that had already been explored, as you may have seen in Gary Park's wonderful presentation earlier today, where he's talking about the exotics, the atmospheric theaters, the theaters like the Egyptian in Los Angeles, which he pointed out most fascinatingly was actually already in progress before Howard Carter had discovered King Tut's tomb. See, I learned something today too, which is fantastic. Thanks, Gary. That kind of thing grabbed the public imagination. And I believe that George Pelcher, who was the chief of these businessmen who had just visited the Alhambra in Spain, said to Starks, who was predominantly designing in the Spanish style in 26, 27, and 28, that this is what Sacramento needed for its new theater. And that's how it started and what made it differently. But you mentioned pageantry, and the theater itself, unlike other theaters, was an event. It was situated at the end of the east end of Sacramento, which at that time had just been fields. There were basically sheep grazing out there past 31st Street in the downtown grid of Sacramento, which has a basic downtown grid, which starts at the Sacramento River and goes east. And so the main thoroughfares of the street, K Street primarily, which was the theater street in Sacramento, had more theaters on it than any of the other thoroughfares through town since the beginning of Sacramento, when it was still a gold rush town. The idea that you would have this icon that was so huge at the end of the street, you could actually see the top of the theater from 30 blocks away looking down the street. So it had a presence and a really impressive sense of size that was just overwhelming. And so you'd stand there looking as if you were looking at the Taj Mahal. It was overwhelming. It was much bigger than you. And this is not just in a child's eye, just as in the eye of an adult. There were so many gardens to run through. You could have a whole Arabian Nights adventure before you bought your ticket. So that, I think, in a sense of pageantry, separated it from other Sacramento theaters and certainly other theaters across the United States.
So one thing I've really gotten interested in lately is about prologues. And I was really happy that Russell and Frederick touched upon the Mr. Blockhead and other kind of prologues, vaudeville acts essentially for the Nickelodeon experience. And then when we get into the Palace type experience, now we're talking about much fancier things. Now, I had added to our schedule the chance to see Footlight Parade, which I think goes to extreme measures. I'm really trying to figure out how many movie theaters would have had a pool sequence, but sure, it's a Busby Berkeley, so why not? But I just,
well, the New York Hippodrome and Ed Kellerman, but that's about it. It was a very small pool, but there you have it.
Okay, so there was a theater that had a pool prologue, but it wasn't like what we saw.
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, I mean, but I just thought it's such an interesting topic. Okay.
Well, let me just take off on the prologue idea and proceed and sort of give you a little narrative before we get to the prologue, because you have to look at the environment of what was going on in the show business to create the existence of it to begin with. This is really the point, as been pointed out by others, but I'm going to expand on that, of the elevation of the Nickelodeon into something extraordinary, something bigger than life. And the showmen involved, Marcus Lowe, Samuel Rothfeld, Roxy, and the other exhibitors dress up the movie houses, as Gary Parks pointed out beautifully and with illustration with images earlier today in his program. But they had to provide a level of service and entertainment that exceeded expectation. And this quote was brilliantly one of Rothfeld's great quotes of all time, when he said, "Don't give the public what they want, give them something better." And then Marcus Lowe, with his theaters, Lowe's Theaters, which owned MGM Studios, the idea that, we sell tickets to theaters and not movies. So at some point, it was the movie attraction on the marquee was no longer the draw or the single draw that brought people there. It was the experience. And the experience consisted of multiple units and the impression one had within this space. Many of these giant palaces took up an entire city block and were the largest interior public spaces some people had ever seen. Also, in the early 1930s, in theaters like Sacramento, where we have a lot of heat, we've got almost 100 degrees outside my library right now. Movie theaters at this time were the first with central heat and air conditioning brought a lot of people in for a long time as well. So it may have been the AC and not the movie on the marquee, but the movie on the marquee was just almost an afterthought, because there was a lot going on when you went to the movies. Let's start with just the experience, the interior lighting, the effects. The atmospheric theaters had projected clouds in the ceilings, and often these movie palaces would do all sorts of projection effects around the projected image on the screen. Once again, the value of the feature itself we can't imagine this today, but they would project these little illuminated stars around the picture sheet while the show was running, something that people would find totally distracting today and absolutely horrible. But people love that kind of thing. Gary Parks pointed out in his program where the movie palaces were very dark and mysterious, and that's true. Although during the continuous show era, some of them were illuminated a little bit brighter because the constant traffic was moving and running through there, unless, of course, there were ushers and Minutemen to take you to their seat, which most of these movie palaces had. So you have this environment where the carpets are so thick with padding that you sink into your knees as you go up the stairs. Of course, we can't have that today because we live in a litigious society, and grandma's going to go down the grand staircase at the Paramount and do a double somersault. So that wonderful rich feeling has gone of those beautiful wool carpets and the wonderful drapery in these theaters. I have right here part of the lobby drapery from the San Francisco Fox. So here you can see this is a velvet drape. It weighs about 100 pounds, and it's a good chunk of the San Francisco Fox lobby drape over one of the beautiful archways in the grand. If I can show this to you very clearly, but you can see how beautifully that's constructed and the sheen and the very weight of it. I mean, this is heavy. It's not cheesy or small in any way. So you have this sense of fabric. You have a sense of size. There's a sense of marble, a palatial feeling where you were truly king for a day. So you've entered this architecture fantasy from the street. The lighting in the main grand lobby would be a little bit lower than it would be when you were outside, of course. And then as you progressed through the theater, making your trip to Movie Land, you would find that it would grow gradually dimmer, each room slightly preparing you for this environment of fantasy where the twinkling stars would shine in the ceiling if it were an atmospheric, or the beautiful draperies or color and light effects in the ceiling and the coves. You had a sense in these buildings that they were much larger than they were because of the darkness and the effective lighting. So first of all, you're in this thing that's an entire city block, the biggest interior space you could see. And way down, if you were in the balcony, way down at the bottom was this picture sheet and a stage, and things were happening down there. Now, before you got into your seat, of course, there was a huge service staff, Minutemen of every kind. You encountered the cashier first, and then there was the footman who was outside opening doors for people pulling up from the street. And then there was the doorman that made sure that the door was secure when you went through with your ticket, to the ticket taker who would then use a large machine with a captain's wheel to crunch the ticket at the doorway. Then you made your way across the great lobby. You know what this is like if you've been to the Oakland Paramount. I remember we'd often sit there and watch people walk in who had never seen it before. They'd walk in through the door, they'd look up, and they'd almost fall over backwards. I mean, it's a marvelous thing to watch because it's just overwhelming. Your eyes just can't take it all in. It's absolutely fantastic. So you're making your way across to the grand staircase that many of these theaters had, and there would be a fancier uniformed usher that you hadn't seen, had a special cat, some epaulettes on his jacket, and then he would take you further up the staircase where an aisle or mezzanine captain would then direct you where to go, and then you would go to an aisle where there'd be an aisle captain who would then take you to the usher of that section, and that usher would then take you to your seat. So already you have felt that you've been pampered like you were living in some great part of Versailles and were the guests of the King and Queen of France. So you've already had this psychological adjustment with lighting and with absolute service. The men's room had a men's room attendant with combs and with towels. The ladies' room had a ladies' room attendant. Not only that, there were things like children's playrooms, hospitals if you didn't feel well, smoking rooms for the men, and by 1931, quite daringly at the Oakland Paramount, a ladies' smoking lounge in the lower level. And of course, most civilized ladies didn't smoke, but some more adventurous, shall I say, intrepid women were interested in, a little calorific cantata. Now it's horrible. Who wants to smoke now will all die. But at the time, it was very chic. And so they did. So it's amazing place that is unlike anything you'd experience when you're paying 5 cents for a loaf of bread in the middle of a horrible depression. And the movie was just a little bit more than that, but you felt you were king for a day. So finally, you're at your theater seat and you have a program that's happening. And this is the real difference, I think, between the movie palace era and going to the movies now. We think of going to the movies as a single show time, an event-based show. We go, we sit there, we wait for the show to start. There's maybe some pre-show entertainment or not, and then the movie happens, and then we leave. Usually in smaller movie theaters now, it's just advertising or stuff on the screen. There's never a curtain. There's no sense of anticipation created. You're just there, it's over with, and you leave. Well, this is certainly not what was going on in the movie palace era, starting in the silent era and all the way through to 1935. There was a real sense that you were going to be dazzled with entertainment, live entertainment combined with the screen attractions. And it wasn't just the main feature. On the screen, or the units as they were called, each section program was called a unit. And so maybe unit one would be the theater organist coming up out of the floor in an amber spotlight and playing a big solo number, maybe something very impressive. Then he would go down, a newsreel would come on, followed by perhaps a cartoon, and then the orchestra elevator would come up and a popular band of the day might play, and this is now the fourth or fifth unit, would play for 15 minutes, Tommy Dorsey, or in the early areas of Paul Whiteman, other famous musicians of the time. And then following that, there would be the stage show prologue that you're talking about now. So Sid Grauman had his famous prologues that went through his theater in the Los Angeles, which were very popular, the Egyptian and the Chinese. I think the Gold Rush had a program called Charlie Chaplin's Dream with 100 people on stage, which was a delightful thing, little girls in igloos and all sorts of fun thematic thing connected to the actual movie. The West Coast theaters had Fanchon and Marco shows. And Fanchon and Marco were probably the Rolls Royce of creating these units just like the ones you mentioned in the James Cagney picture, Footlight Parade. He would have these various vaudevillians, dancers, and actors create these mini Broadway brevities, and they would be running in multiple theaters. So West Coast theaters would have, for example, the Fox San Francisco, the Fox Senator in Sacramento, and the Alhambra, which was run by Fox for a while. Then you could go further up to Portland, there was a Fox theater there. Fox West Coast ran the Elsinore Theater in Salem. There was a Fox theater in Seattle. So these units would go every 3 days, would go from one theater to the next theater to the next theater with these 45-minute stage shows. So already you've been, the program has consisted of almost an hour and a half, and you haven't seen the main feature yet. Then you have perhaps an MC or a singer on stage accompanied by the organ or a small congregation of the full orchestra. I think the orchestra at the Fox had almost 80 musicians, give and take over different times. There were most houses had about 29 or 30. At San Francisco Fox, like the Oakland Paramount, has an orchestra elevator. So these people would come out, you'd hear them first, and then they'd just come up out of the floor. That's the best entrance in show business. So after all of this, you finally got a picture that was advertised on the marquee when you came in. Now, also during this era, continuous shows were absolutely the norm, which meant the theater opened at 11, and all of these units, let's say 8 units in a total show, would start at 11 and they would repeat. So when unit 8 started, the minute that ended, unit 1 would start again. Absolute continuity. The theater never shut down or stopped operating. So that meant that you would come whenever you felt like it. You didn't have to come right at opening. You could just come when you felt like it, and the show would be in progress. And you would see perhaps the stage show or the Fanchon and Marco show or the Grauman prologue if you were in one of Grauman's theaters. And then you would see the movie and you'd come around, the prologue would start again, and you'd know you'd seen the whole show, and it brought a phrase into the English language. This is where I came in, which has been used often in Warner Brothers cartoons and made fun of throughout the English language since. And it's a fun way to remember how that started, because people would just come in when they felt like it. And because the theaters were air conditioned, you could sit there and watch Fred Dance with Ginger 10 more times if you felt like it, because it was air conditioned, and stay there all day. They didn't chase you out. You know, I think something that a lot of people who have been to these wonderful old restored theaters, they go to these concerts today where they go in and everybody goes in at once, and then everyone comes out at intermission at once, and the ladies' room stalls, there's only like 4, and the women are saying, why is it at a theater that seats 2,000 or 3,000 people has only 5 stalls on the mezzanine? And because it was never intended by the architects for the entire audience to be in the lobby at one time because of this continuous show policy. So these theaters were built with the idea that there was a constant ebb and flow of traffic, and that at no time would the entire audience need to go to the bathroom at once, or excuse me, lavatory, we say in the show business. Clean it up, dress it up a little bit. And so it was a fascinating time, and these prologues absolutely were a sensation. And a lot of vaudevillians started there. Milton Berle started as an MC, working in a lot of these prologues in these various theaters. George Burns also did, and certainly Jack Benny did a lot of these movie palace prologues. You hear vaudevillians talking about doing 4 a day. It's because the program being continuous, their unit would appear 4 times within the course of a day, and that's when they had to be back at the theater to do their live bit at what you would think is a movie palace. So these giant places were called combination houses because they really were stage and screen combined. And it was from 25 to, let's say, 35 was in the big downtown movie palaces. I'm not talking about the little neighborhood theaters, but in these large theaters, it was expected that you would have this lavish level of entertainment for 25 or 35 cents. And there was nothing.
Wow. Well, I can say that I've been to the Chicago Marquee Theater, and I got to take a tour there, and they were able to show what you're talking about. I can totally visualize. It's exciting to me to be able to hear what you're saying, but actually visualize it, because I just think about the tour that I went on where we walked up the staircase, and there's the usher buttons and all those things. And I would highly suggest, if anybody has the chance to see these movie palaces that are still here. I mean, I still need to go to the Paramount and the Fox. I need to go on a behind the scenes tour to see how those facilities are set up. But I love the description about the prologues, because it explains to me a lot of the experience, that it wasn't, I mean, now, like you're saying, you go there, you see a movie, you're gone. It's all at one time. Maybe there's a time when there's a double bill. If I go to the Stanford Theater, we have a little organ music playing at times, and then we have 2 very nice film prints being shown, one after the other. So I'm glad there's still entities out there that have a little something. I mean, the Castro Theater obviously is a wonderful one with their organ playing whatever version of organ they have, and I know that's changed over the years.
It has.
Are there any other places that you think around the country that people should be checking out that you can think of that still have a prologue type of atmosphere?
I don't know if anyone's recreating the prologue. I mean, the astronomical expense of it. The reason it was possible at all, as is explained in the James Cagney picture Footlight Parade from Warner Brothers, is that the cost of the scenery, costumes weren't just one theater didn't have to pay for it. The cost was spread over all the houses that ran it, and there would be multiple ones in the circuit. The Pantages circuit, Fox West Coast, where Franklin and Marco was, and of course the Grauman theaters where his prologues would play. Grauman not so much, because he had fewer theaters, and so he was just paying the expense of that mostly himself. But certainly Fanchon and Marco, those costs were spread out, so it made it possible. But the Depression hit everyone very hard, and perhaps the most lovely prologues in the Bay Area were at the Fanchon and Marco shows at the Fox Theater on 9th and Market. And by 1930, which is the theater opened in 29, by 1932, they actually stopped the prologues because they couldn't afford to mount them. They came back for a short while in 1935, but by then they were just really streamlining the show just down to the organist, an occasional personal appearance like Bing Crosby or Laurel and Hardy, who appeared on the stage of the Fox in person. Later in the 50s, Martin and Lewis did a big impression of Selma, not Selma Hayek, but I can't think of the name of the woman. She just went out of my head. She's a famous opera singer, made an appearance there. So Fifi Dorsey made some personal appearances there. Al Jolson was there, and the audience was so low, there was almost nobody in the balcony, and Jolson said to the stage manager, "We could go deer hunting in the balcony, there's nobody here." So some shows were not as popular as others. So the Fox still retained up until 63, when it was demolished. All of the echoes of that greatness of show business. But no one that I know is doing a prologue now. And it's really sad. Now, we try at the Fox California in Stockton to recreate a little of the experience, just like the Castro and the Oakland Paramount does, where I was associated for a short period of time. Probably the happiest time I ever had in my life was working at the Oakland Paramount, where I was emceeing the Deco in on occasion, coming up out of the floor, and that was always fun, and giving tours of the theater. The Fox Stockton, which is the Bob Hope Theater now, we run a classic movie once a month, make an event-based program, and we start with the organ for half an hour. We have a Robert Morton theater organ there, and then we have a cartoon, some shorts, previously coming attractions. I go on stage and do a big giveaway. We give away valuable prizes people can win from the comfort and luxury of their extra legroom Fox Theater chairs. And then following that, we show the main feature. So there's an element of that we're trying to recreate. But to get to the level that these movie palaces had in the 30s was something that really only lasted 10 years, but it was probably the most glorious years show business had ever known, because there wasn't such a separation between legit and the movie industry. There was this wonderful 10 years where there was this absolute continuity and integral feeling between all facets of show business to entertain the public as best and as marvelously and as luxuriously as could be done. And that was done, of course, through all the units. I mean, people always approach these old theaters from their level of interest. Some people wanted them for rock concerts. Some people want to preserve the organ, and they're all about the organ. Some people want to show just the classic movies. And often we think of movies, certainly at Niles, which is so intimate in the Edison Theater, and we have the wonderful experience when Frederick Hodges is playing, or we're watching a movie, or any of the great wonderful people come to educate us and entertain us. I love that. When you learn something and you're being entertained, there's nothing better on the planet. And that happens a lot at Niles. And it's a very intimate, wonderful feeling. In these giant movie palaces, that the psychological thing is different, because the theater itself is half of the show. One of those elements by itself, although it may be wonderful for those who love it, is not the same psychological impact as all of those units working in tandem for the big wow that makes it something so awesome that you have to come back and see it again. That was my experience going to the Oakland Paramount for the first time. Someone dragged me down there for a movie, and I went as a kid for concerts because I was living in Berkeley right after it reopened in '73. And then Jack Bethards used to be the MC for the Deco In, and I remember seeing that as a young man, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to come up out of the floor and introduce the movie. And I eventually got to do it. So I could die tomorrow and be perfectly happy because I've come out of the floor at the Paramount. But the point I'm making is that it's really all of these elements in tandem. And that's a world we'll never see again. It only lasted about 10 years. And I wish in my fondest dreams we could mount something like that. I think the Radio City Music Hall comes the closest with their Christmas Spectacular. But that's the last place on the planet that can do that. And it's really sad to see it go. But thankfully, we have memories. We have wonderful programs. We have people who love this stuff. Myself, Gary Parks, all of those that you've seen in this great Bronco Billy and Friends Silent Film Festival, with the focus on the theaters that we've had all day today, which has been great. I've been up since early watching most of these programs, and it's just been so much fun. I just love it. It's just really great. I just love it.
Well, thank you. Well, so let me ask you a question. So I've seen Deco In and I know what it is, but how did it come up with the name Deco In? What is that? Is that short for something, or is just somebody came up with that as a title?
In 1936, on Market Street, the Embassy Theater had, I believe it was the Embassy, someone will correct me, I know if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's the Embassy Theater, had the 10-win wheel, where you could win 50 silver dollars, and it had all sorts of complex multiple spinning elements. There was the wheel that spun, but there was an arrow and then another arrow around. So three things going concentrically in different directions, which is always fabulous. And people would also win if they had a canary yellow ticket or a different colored, multiple colored tickets. A lot of ways to win. They would use this to draw people in. And it was such a popular thing that the theater franchised the wheels and sold them all over the West Coast. The Alhambra Theater had a 10-win wheel starting in '36. And it was also, one was available at the time of the restoration of the Paramount, and the gifted David Boysel, who is one of our great movie palace heroes. I just love this guy. He is not only a dear friend, but his artistry has made the Paramount look more like 1931 than ever before. It's an ongoing, constant work he's been doing for over 20 years, and he devised the Deco-Win wheel. He just simply took the 10 from Tenowin and just put in Dec for Deco, for Art Moderne, Art Deco, and that's how it became the Deco-Win wheel. It's terribly clever. I don't know if Jack Bethards came up with the name of it, but David Boysel affected the sign on the wheel itself and gave it all the glitter and glamour it has when you see it spinning at the Oakland Paramount.
Okay, Art Deco. That's the part that was missing for me. Was I'm like, okay, is it decoration they're going to? Okay, Art Deco. Oh, I'm feeling so much better now. See, you did educate me today. So I have a question, and yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, my
question. I was just going to point. There's a lot of great books.
Go ahead. I know we're having a little bit of.
Oh, okay. Hold your question. Yeah. Hold your question. I'll be right. I just wanted to point out a few books. I don't know if these can be seen or not. If you want to investigate this wonderful era of the movie palace further, Ben M. Hall's The Best Remaining Seats is probably the first and great volume on the subject to get a sense of all of those elements I've been talking about, the stage shows, the organists, the music, the films, every aspect of the movie palace was pretty much covered here. The first edition that I had of it somehow was this one, which was purloined from the library of Walt Disney. I don't know how, I hope they're not missing it. And specifically in Bay Area theaters, if you can find one, they're worth their weight in gold. The Last Word, the story of the world's finest theater by Preston Kaufman, is a Bible, and it actually gives you every single gross the theater had from 1929 to 1963. I mean, it is the most detailed, informative book on the operation. It's the world's finest example of exactly what I'm talking about. Matter of fact, that drape I was holding earlier may be seen right here in this photograph on the cover of the Fox, The Last Word. A smaller book, which the name of the book is Once a Lavish San Francisco Landmark. It's called Fox, The Last Word, the story of the world's finest theater by Preston Kaufman. And for me, it was a Bible. I read this thing over and over and over. It took me about 15 years to find one, but when I did this, and it really did inspire Chad Williams and I in the making of Alhambra, Sacramento's Palace of Fantasy, because it had so much rich detail and so fascinating. We wanted to tell a story visually in a movie in the same way. There's a wonderful book by Gary D. Rhodes called The Perils of Moviegoing in America, which is a great title, but it discusses exactly the movie palace experience and the smaller movie theater experience brilliantly. The Perils of Moviegoing in America, 1896 to 1950, which was, of course, the golden age of the motion picture. Not saying that we don't have good movies now, and there are some, but there weren't like the films you'd see in an environment of splendor and an acre of seats in a garden of splendor. So that's a nice one to pick up. For the idea of the continuous performance, this is out of print, but it's really interesting. It's called Continuous Performance, which is a fabulous book by A.J. Balaban of the Balaban and Katz chain of theaters in Chicago and in the East. And it is a wonderful a book called Continuous Performance, and that tells you a lot about that era of the movie prologue. There's one called Lollipop, which I don't have right here on the desk with me, but Lollipop is the story of a Fanchon and Marco dancer and her experiences touring all over the West Coast with Fanchon and Marco. It's called Lollipop, and it's the story of the Fanchon and Marco dancer. If you go to the Oakland Paramount, the wonderful Susan Harris Stone book, The Oakland Paramount, is still sold very economically on the tour. Now, there aren't tours presently, but when the Paramount reopens again, I'm sure they will have their tour on the first and third Saturday of the month again, and it can be had very nicely. It shows you the beautiful restoration of the Oakland Paramount, which is truly one of our great treasures on the planet. To me, it's absolute heaven. Any moment I'm in the Paramount, I haven't a care in the world, because when you pass through that portal, you leave all cares behind. There's a wonderful book by William Paul called When Movies Were Theater. That's a fine book. William Paul, When Movies were theater. We're just giving you a little bibliography here on further reading on the subject of the movie palace. There's a great book by Charles Ward Rapp about Rapp and Rapp, the wonderful architects that built the great movie palaces throughout the United States. Charles Ward Rapp, Rapp and Rapp Architects, many illustrations on the inside. We've got a few more here. We've got the book by Craig Morrison, Theaters. See if I can get it without the stage lights in the way. There we go. It's a nice big movie palace there. And it says here, the Norton Library of Congress Visual Source Books in Architecture, Design, and Engineering. And that's Craig Morrison's Theaters. Now I'm just, hold on, I'm not giving you my entire library. You can see there are more books I haven't picked up, but we have those wonderful old downtown theaters with these two very chummy fellows on the front, which is the author of which is Phil Sheridan. Phil Sheridan, those wonderful old downtown theaters. For our friends who are interested in what was going on in Canada with similar types of buildings, Turn Out the Stars Before Leaving is a wonderful book about movie palaces. And of course, they're speaking of atmospheric theaters here with the twinkling stars at night, giving the illusion that it was nighttime when the movie was running, and then the sun would rise at the end of the picture and bringing on the new day. Or as you were going in before the program started, the sun would set, the stars would twinkle, and the show would begin. It's John C. Lindsay's Turn Out the Stars Before Leaving. Now, we also have similar title to the Ben Hall book, slightly different, The Last Remaining Seats, and the authors is Robert Berger, Berger, and Anne, I can't read Anne's name, but if you'll go with Mr. Berger, I'm sure you'll be able to find The Last Remaining Seats, the movie palaces of Tinseltown. David Naylor wrote a book called American Picture Palaces, The Architecture of Fantasy. I may have lifted an element of this title for the title of a movie about the Alhambra Theater in Sacramento. It was so good. How could I improve on it? American Picture Palaces by David Naylor, The Architecture of Fantasy. And I believe Dover, is it Dover? Vestal Press reprinted two books from 1928 called American Theaters of Today, which had blueprints of all of the major movie palaces showing all of the various ways that they would do just about anything. I have two of the original volumes from 28, but this Vestal Press reprint can be found. It's called American Theaters of Today, and I don't think there is I can't remember off the top of my head if an author is credited here. Samuel Rothafel does the intro. Let's see here, by R.W. Sexton, Sexton, and B.F. Betts, Betts, associate editor of the American Architecture. So that's American Theaters of Today. Lastly, I recently encountered a nice little treasure. This is not something you're going to find anywhere, but it really helps in trying to illustrate and learn more about these prologues and how shows were done. The Paramount Publix chain, which went into receivership when they were building the Oakland Paramount, later it was took over and purchased by Fox West Coast, who actually opened the theater. But when they started building the Paramount Publix, their movie chain of the Paramount Studios, had started to build that. And they had their Publix theater chain, and they would produce a rag that was for all of their movie palaces called the Publix Opinion. This is a bound volume of it, and it would come out every week with all sorts of exploitation ideas for the movie palaces to use. Here's an idea for your theater and your market and how to get this picture sold. Sort of like Exhibitor or Box Office Magazine would be later, but specific to Paramount Publix, including all of the traveling shows and performers, including Paul Whiteman and other famous bands of the day, tips on how to promote your organist with local merchants. And it's a fascinating read. Come visit me and I'll share it with you. Or if you find the Publix, like the Publix markets, but no connection, opinion, it's It's a treasured part of the movie palaces of the past.
Wow. Okay. Well, I actually been typing these, and I typing these in our chat, and I will add them to um, our Facebook page, and also we'll put them on the web page for this particular program because I want to make sure people have access to them. It's absolutely wonderful. Hopefully, I'll have the proper spellings and all the authors and everything. I just was rattling off as you were saying that I did everything I could to get them down. This is awesome. So
she's a superwoman. Rena's a superwoman.
Trying to type at the same time talking.
Now, I should say, we should, before we run away, you should go back up in the thread of the chats. You will find that wonderful Michael Bonham has included the names of the two movies of the posters that you.
I did see that. Actually, that's Michael Oss. Michael Oss is
we're not in suspense. What were those movies about?
So Michael Oss,
a different Michael. Sorry.
We have several, okay, we have wonderful Michael supporters. So Michael Oss, the posters are the Opal Ring from 1915, measures 40 inches wide by 56 inches high. And the Misleading Lady from 1916 measures 50 inches wide by 40 inches high. So those are the dimensions. And everybody who knows such things, they know if that's a one sheet or larger. So
it's larger.
It is larger.
It's almost like a 60 by 40, which was a scale. Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. Almost twice, almost 3 times the size of a one sheet.
Wow. Okay. Well, and those.
So anyway, I have to say that.
Yes. You have to say.
I was waiting for you. You said those were.
Oh no, I was saying is those are big. But we're so thankful. We are so thankful that we have them now, and those were supported by people who want to. First of all, they were donated to us by Jadis Props, and they people should definitely check them out in Santa Monica. Pretty amazing place it looks like, and they have additional posters available for sale that aren't. They must have been purchased. They must have been brought evidently in a roll from Cleveland, Ohio, where they were printed or partially printed, brought to Hollywood, and that's how they ended up in Santa Monica. And she does know to which films these partial posters came from, because she did the research and went to the Herrick Library and such, was able to get them partnered up with a still frame photo. So if anybody has an interest in that, you can always contact me, but you can also contact jadisprops.com and take a look there, and then ask them about their partial SNA posters. She'll know exactly what you're talking about. But so I got one more question for you, Matias, because
sure.
So we talked about so Russell and Frederick talked about the vaudeville aspects of the Nickelodeon era. How are the prologues different, or how would they be seen as different than just fancy vaudeville shows? I mean, what made them different from a vaudeville piece?
Well, vaudeville often had comedy, although the prologues did too. They often had famous musical stars performing musical numbers. They were more in the nature of a musical show. Now, the Grauman prologues were all thematically connected to whatever major picture he was opening. So he would actually have something written and created for a film. So like Charlie Chaplin's Dream, with 100 people on stage for the premiere at the Egyptian of the Gold Rush, had this thematic igloo, girls in outfits that, created, and they had some sort of Chaplin imitator doing something, having this dream sequence. So that definitely was almost it's a dramatic story, a dramatic situation set to music with dancers. The Fanchon and Marco stage shows were actually called ideas. They were Fanchon and Marco ideas. So there was the Green Goddess idea, the Electric idea, the Sun-Kissed Beauties were the girls that often appeared in them. And at the Oakland Paramount, it was Lou Kozlov and his orchestra that would accompany the Fanchon and Marco stage shows. And they were more in the nature of what was called on Broadway at the time a revue. Instead of a narrative show like Carousel or any of the big Broadway shows, King and I, where there's a definite story, where there's a narrative dramatic part, and then there's a musical number, and then a little bit more of the story, and then another musical number. The review was basically a set of blackouts with an occasional bit of comedy, but not low comedy like something you would see in burlesque. And vaudeville was still a little bit on the cusp of being slightly naughty like burlesque, but not quite as effective. The best way to describe the differences between burlesque, vaudeville, the Ziegfeld shows, and this kind of stage prologue is beautifully handled in everybody's favorite movie, Singing in the Rain, where you see the development of Gene Kelly's fame as he goes through these different stages of that kind of entertainment. So he starts in the cheapest, lowest kind of burlesque, and then slowly climbs the ladder of fame into the more elegant. So in the burlesque, he's wearing, clown slap shoes, and by the time he reaches Ziegfeld, he's in white tie and tails with girls in beautiful plumes. So there's that distinction is very important. And so the Grauman prologues, the Fanchon de Marco stage shows, the various shows through the Paramount Publix theaters, we're trying to elevate from the era of the Nickelodeon, from the era of the burlesque house, into something elegant. It had to match the tone of the space in which it was in. And so the nature of the shows were more in the nature of the shows were more like a review, which was popular on Broadway. Some people would have a bunch of songs, a couple of blackouts, a comic act, and that was a marvelous part of Broadway that has vanished. But these were mini compressed reviews with 4 or 5 numbers. And if you look at sheet music collectors, of which several are fans of the Niles Film Museum, you will find occasional sheet music pieces that would say, for example, Stairway of Dreams from the Fanchon and Marco review, such and such idea. And so they were popular enough that sheet music was published for them, and people would see them in these little shows and want to rush out and buy the music. So it worked like a device to sell sheet music. It was that popular. And we all know that Warner Brothers cartoons started to take over that capacity when the stage shows started to go away. Warner Brothers cartoons, which are Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, use the Warner Brothers music library to sell and effectively promote music, so people would buy sheet music for forthcoming features. So if you would see Honeymoon Hotel with Dick Powell a few months earlier, there would be a Warner Brothers colored cartoon with mice running around a hotel singing that song. So it would be in your brain, conditioning you. So by the time you saw Honeymoon Hotel, you said, I have to have that music, and you'd run out to the sheet music store, probably across the street or in one of the storefronts in the theater building itself, and you'd take that home and play it on the piano. This is in the era before World War II, because after World War II, the individual performing the song made a recording, and the actual recording became popular. Before World War II, standard songs were written by famous composers who were the stars, the Cole Porters, the Irving Berlins of the world, and 112 bands would record it, and you would buy the sheet music to play it yourself, or find the band that you like playing that record of that song that you had seen in the Fanchon and Marco stage show or in the Warner Brothers cartoon.
Wow. Okay, you answered my question in such a great way, because I knew that it was more that the Nickelodeon era was the era of the vaudeville. And when I tried to explain to young people, when I take them on tours of our film museum, and I explained to them about what vaudeville is, I said, I think you know what vaudeville is. And they look at me and I say, because I would say to someone my age, I'd say, remember Ed Sullivan? And they'd go, oh, okay, yeah, Ed Sullivan. But with a little one, I'll say, have you seen America's Got Talent? And they know what America's Got Talent's about. And I said, okay, singers, dancers, acrobats, all kinds of, yeah. I said, that's vaudeville. And they go, oh, and they have a complete reference point, and it really helps. I really, I found that a lot with talking with young people, is if I can give them a rep, because I'm thinking, what would I feel like if I was 8 years old and I'm walking into this Nickelodeon theater, and it's, dark wood, and there's, pictures of things on the wall, but I'm not connected with it. I mean, how exactly can we connect? And so that's part of, so when I can give them some point of reference that they understand, even if they've never seen the show, they know what America's Got Talent's about, or World of Dance, or any of those kinds of things. And then show them the pictures and such. And when we get back to doing our shows again, hopefully by October, we'll go back to doing our raffle. And we have a raffle, and we have our shorts program. Then we do our raffle. We just pull out the ticket and give out a prize. Sometimes we do trivia contests or things like that. And then we have our feature presentation. So we do a little tiny bit of a, well, it's not a prologue, but we do a little tiny deco in type of thing. We're only 100-seat theater, and we just try to have fun, but we also try to keep things moving because time is money and people have got places to go. But when they come, they a lot of times they don't even know what to expect, even though they've seen shorts listed and they see there's a feature. They have no concept of how it's going to be done, and I'm a little confused on that, but they don't know necessarily the timing of the shorts and all that. And sometimes they are completely satisfied the first half of the show. They're like, okay, we got the kids, we got to put them to bed, but we've had a complete experience, and thank you very much, and all that. But you talking about the pageantry, I really appreciate it. And Singing in the Rain is another one of those films that we have listed on our schedule that just we can get access to the justwatch.com. You put the film title in and it tells you all the ways you can see it streaming or on Netflix or wherever it is. And it did seem like Singing in the Rain was a good one to list this year, along with Footlight Parade, which is fun. That's a fun one because Footlight Parade was directed, the musical sequences by Busby Berkeley, of course, but the non-musical sequences by Lloyd Bacon. And Lloyd Bacon got his start in Niles. His father owned a theater, a legitimate stage theater, I believe, in San Jose. What's that, David? He was an actor. Okay, his father was an actor. All right, I'm getting the peanut gallery over here. So Lloyd Bacon came to Niles and made movies there, and then went on to Hollywood and became a director. And that's kind of a fun little Niles connection for that film, is how many degrees of separation. But so thank you, Matias, for all your talk. Do you have is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience here?
Just a couple of points. One, you were talking about this analogy between what was this kind of stage prologue or vaudeville like for younger people. 20 years ago, you could have said to the young people then, it was like watching Ed Sullivan, because when television arrived, all of those Fanchon and Marco dancers, those Grauman prologue performers who had been out of work because of the Depression and World War II, suddenly all came back to life in their 50s and 60s, performing on variety shows on television, which was basically what a review show was on Broadway. And so television resuscitated so many careers of people who had been famous. Gene Austin, Eddie Peabody, the banjo player, all these people came back on TV in the 50s and were stars again. I also wanted to thank the Niles Film Museum for asking for Alhambra, Sacramento's Palace of Fantasy on behalf of Chad Williams, myself, and Wendell Jacob, who put up the money to produce the whole thing. We're very grateful to him so that you could see it and we could make it. But the reason we did this is we wanted to support Niles in a way. And of course, they had a nice donor that paid us something for the movie, and we're very grateful for that because we can't give it away. It costs so much, we're still trying to make it back. But we wanted you to be able to see it for free today as a way to entice you, Chad Williams and I and Wendell Jacob, to make a donation. Rena didn't put me up to this, so don't think, but please make a donation to the building fund of the Niles building renovation, and maybe she'll put the link here on the chat so that you can do that. We were saying you can watch our movie when we promoted it on the internet this week, but what we want you to do is, since the Alhambra is gone and the Edison is still here, let's keep it here so that we still have a place where memories are made. Because ultimately, all of these places, all of these theaters, all of these people who work behind the scenes holding wires together, the people you saw on the stage, the bean counter in the office, the janitor that's making sure that the toilet flush valves work, all are doing it to make memories for you, memories that you take throughout your whole life. And I'm reminded of of that wonderful cartoon that appeared, I don't know if it was in the New Yorker or the New York Times, of the big rotunda of the Roxy Theater, and this little kid is pulling on his mother's dress and looking up at the splendor and says, "Mom, does God live here?" Memories. We want to make memories. That's what it's about.
Well, thank you, Matias. So I did put just our website, nilesfilmmuseum.org, and in the middle of the top of it, it says donate. Click on that button. We are having a $2 million capital campaign that's just getting underway. We have been given the building by our most generous landlord. I mean, that doesn't happen, not in the Bay Area, not in 2021, but we were given it. His mother put it in her trust. But there is a lot of renovation that needs to happen with it. And that'll be very apparent when anybody comes in, when we are showing movies again. But we are open Saturdays and Sundays, 12 to 4, for tours of our museum, and our store is open. And hopefully by the fall, hopefully by October, we'll be showing movies again on in our 100-seat Nickelodeon. But there is so much thing, and hopefully Gary Parks is going to be involved with making it look really good. But first we got to work with the foundation. We got to do plumbing, electrical, and you were talking about those lavatories. Oh, we got to get those working so we have more of them available, and redo the kitchen and all kinds of things. So we can start all that. Once we get the first million, then we can really start on that. So anybody
That's big.
Yes. So anybody wants to throw some money in the pot, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Matias, very much. Take care.
Thank you.